All right, for the audience that doesn't know you, feel free to introduce yourself.
All right. Hello, guys. My name, as the title says, Alessandro. I go by Alessi with my friends. I am the COO of the Julian Dory podcast, producer, scheduler, right-hand man, jack of all trades, master of none type of situation. And then I also have my own channel, which is pretty much investigative journalism mixed with on the boots journalism. So I do some high quality faceless documentaries on subjects that I believe are not talked about enough. Like I call it hidden truths, that side of it. But then I also do literally get on the ground with a GoPro, go talk to the people, talk to the folks like you and I, and just figure out what's going on and tell those stories. So that's kind of the summary, I would say.
Well, so there's one in particular recently that you did that got taken down. It was the Jeffrey Epstein docuseries.
Yes, that was beyond frustrating. And that was something that I had spent to be honest, it's been 3 years in the making because I've been studying this whole case ever since 2022. Even though I know he died in 2019, but it really didn't come to my attention until 2022. That just because I began to hear more about it and investigate. And obviously Netflix had the series that came out where they touched on Jeffrey Epstein. And that was like, that's fascinating, but I think there's still a little bit of meat on the bone. And then recently when I switched to these high quality documentaries, I felt like there was an angle that had not been discussed enough. And I don't see any of the content on the internet regarding it. And I feel like the focus is on the brother. And the brother's only done a handful of interviews, Mark Epstein. And the interviews that he's done is he's spoken with Patrick Bet-David. There's a good piece on there that's fascinating. You get to hear his insights, but you don't see his face. All the interviews, you can't see his face. You don't know who he is. He only wants to do him audio. And then he also had one with Piers Morgan, which was 10 minutes. Then he's done a couple others, but he, to me, is the most fascinating character. I'm not implicating him as if he's part of the whole sex trafficking ring and what happened and all that. However, I feel like he's not discussed enough.
In what regard? Like, what is it about him that isn't discussed enough?
Well, he's the last living relative of Epstein. Epstein's father died in 1992, if I'm not mistaken. Someone could go fact check me on that. And then the mother passed away. Actually, sorry, no. The father passed away in the 2000s, and the mother passed away in 1992, 91. And so it's the last living relative, Mark. And Mark essentially, imagine familial, bloodline. I understand that some families, fall apart, but there's always this innateness. And based on what I've heard from him speaking, they had a somewhat close relationship, being a few years in age. And on top of that, being the last relative, you'd have that connection with somebody. And so, Epstein's rise is obviously extremely suspect, starting in the 80s where he's working at Barron and Stern. And obviously he makes a couple bucks there. And before you know it, in 1991, he's tied up with Ghislaine Maxwell. And before you know that, Robert Maxwell, her father, passes away mysteriously in a boat. And all of a sudden, he goes from being a pretty well-off dude, couple $1,000,000, to hundreds of millions of dollars. And that is one of the points that I tried to make in that video about Mark Epstein is, he describes his brother in this way where it's like, I love him. He died. It was very sad. I don't approve of what he did. But when he talks about how he made his money, this is where all the red flags come up, because he immediately says he made a couple good investments. He invested in Riddell helmets, those football helmets, and he made a couple $100 million from that. And before you know it, he has $600 to $700 million in net worth. And none of that makes any sense. You can ask any accountant, you can ask any person in the finance world. You don't go from a couple mil to $100 million like that.
Even politicians don't have a record like that. Even politicians.
No, exactly. Not Nancy Pelosi, not those, unless, they have the crazy inside trading. But even then, that takes some time, right? That takes years to build up. But the amount of money that came in, if Mark Epstein had said, yeah, that's strange, I don't know about that, I would have been like, all right, whatever. But the fact that he is on the side that he made it organically and naturally. And then on top of that, he did $153 million, estate planning for this billionaire. I can't remember the billionaire's name. That has never been heard of. Estate planning for $150 million. Like, you're talking something that's done maybe for $1 million or a couple million, but $153 million. And that's where it pretty much sent me home. And I'm like, I have to make this video, is because of the fact that he says that he doesn't believe his brother was blackmailing anybody. And I'm just like, that is just, it could be two things. It could be one where he's really trying to protect his brother and that, you know, he loves him, he has that side of him, or he really is out of the loop. And I don't know what to believe, but I wanted to shed light on that. And then after 8 days of being posted, it started to really take off. We started to see the views start to just climb immediately, people liking it. It had almost 100% like ratio, which is unheard of. It had one dislike and it was just climbing up. And next thing you know, I'm sitting on the couch enjoying a lovely evening, and I get an email, and the email says your video has been flagged and it has been removed. And I'm just thinking immediately, like, they didn't even give me a chance. They usually go like they demonetize and they give you ability to appeal and all that. They didn't even give me the chance. They removed it immediately. And I tried reaching out, and this is where I realized it was above my head, was that the person responded, "Hey, the internal team made a decision. I don't have access to the internal team. It is above me," which, funny enough, that's kind of what the Acosta Attorney General said too. They were talking about Epstein, but that's another thing. So I don't know, pretty weird, pretty suspicious, big bummer. Spent a lot of time trying to make that video, but yeah, that's kind of why I think Mark Epstein, you know, his angle, what he knows, you know, everyone wants to know about the Epstein files. You want to know, I want to know, you know, I hope Pam Bondi was going to do something about that. And, you know, that's been one of the most disappointing things about this administration is they had all these expectations for the files to come through, and then they had that grand release, as you saw, and it was just an absolute dumpster fire because it was everything we'd already known. We'd already seen these flight logs, and it was like, we want to see the footage. Well, we don't want to see the footage like that, but we want to see the evidence of what happened. We want to see the documentation, who was there, who was involved, because this implicates so many people, and people forget the victims are quite literally still waiting for their justice. And Virginia Roberts, unfortunately, recently, I think it was 2 days ago, she got in an accident and she's apparently going to pass away. So she's never going to get that vindication and justice that she deserves. And, you know, it goes back to, who are they protecting? What is the deeper thing going on here? And why can't the public know about this? So, you know, that's kind of the 2 cents on that.
Well, so here's another thing. So, I mean, I could talk about Jeffrey Epstein for days. And, you know, I've also done a lot of research into it. There's a few things that nobody ever talks about. One in particular is his obsession with science. So, do you know about this?
I know that he invited Stephen Hawking and a bunch of the scientists onto Little St. James, and he held a lot of those conventions, and he tried being in those rooms. But beyond that, I don't know his particular interest in the science of what it was. But no, tell me.
Well, so Andrew Huberman did an interview, right? And, you know, upon not only having those heavy connections with science, right? If you really think about it, okay, all the world leaders, like all the famous people, the world leaders, that makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense is the scientists. He had a really fascinating obsession with science. And according to Andrew Huberman, he actually was on Joe Rogan and he's talking about this. He's like, Epstein went out of his way to actually fund and to donate to science, like specifically at universities, which then begs an important, and especially in physics, right? That was his main thing, right? Andrew Huberman never knew him, but it was mainly in physics, right? That sort of world. And if you look at like all the people he had connections to, Stephen Hawking, Lawrence Krauss, who was actually on Julian's podcast.
Yeah. Right.
You know, and by the way, Lawrence Krauss still hung out with him after Epstein had his convictions, which is interesting to say the least. But, you know, why would a multi-billionaire who is very busy, you know, is in rooms with all the most powerful people in the world, why does he have a particular obsession with physics? That's something that nobody really touches on. The only person ever touched on it was Huberman and I think Eric Weinstein.
Wow. So the angle I see from that, and I can understand the science perspective and I'd love to learn more of that. But to me, what fascinates me is, you know, I think the running theory, which the internet agrees upon, that he was to some capacity, some agent for some intelligence organization. It seems like, you know, all the arrows are pointing towards Mossad, that there's a lot of Israeli connections to that. And to me, I think pretty much to the sole mission of Mossad. And I'm reading this book right now called Gideon's Spies, which I really recommend people to read. It's probably the only book where Thomas Grubber essentially got access to some former Mossad spies who came public. And, Mossad, kind of like the CIA, a lot of things are kept under wraps. They don't disclose a lot, but he, for whatever reason, got access to some spies. So a lot of it's alleged. And they're talking about how Mossad infiltrates these organizations and people, and how they build assets, kind of like Bustamante talks about, Kiriakou, who I know you've spoken to, all these people, how they build these assets, and then the conversations and like that transaction, and how a lot of it is psychology of trying to manipulate, pretty much to get what you want. And I can see from the point of view of Mossad seeing the science avenue being so powerful into tapping into the network and the heartbeat of the United States education system. If you can get your hands on some professors in these universities that are teaching these, subjects that are important, that also have a lot of funding, that are usually government funded, and you have those people as assets telling you information on the inside, what do those government contracts look like, to then the relationship of those contracts with other people and other scientists, I can see how that could spread out across all the universities. Because, I bet you've seen it in just like I've seen it in my university setting, where it's like some scientists in UC San Diego, where I went, they know the group of people that are researching, let's say, for example, the multiverse, right? They know that in Harvard, they have other scientists there, as well as in Princeton, and then call it U Miami, whatever it may be. They're all connected in some regard because they're all studying the same field. So I could see Mossad using that, being like, we could tap into all these areas and use these scientists. And, if my alleged theory is right, get them on the island, blackmail them, and use that to, pursue whatever Israel's goal is ultimately. So that's what I could see that angle.
Well, so I think the most interesting testimony about Epstein, and this is about the science part of it and just in general, was Eric Weinstein is really the only person that has come forward as to what actually happened when he went to the island. Like what Epstein actually did to him, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, no, he's a weird guy, that had, they kind of dance around it because they don't want to talk about it. Eric Weinstein is one of the few people that's actually spoken about what the island actually was like. So Eric Weinstein, I guess when he got flown to the island or whatever, he just said a few things. Number one, he said that Epstein was rich kind of in the way that a movie billionaire is rich. It's all in Chris Williamson's show. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you?
I have not. I have to look into this. So keep telling me. I'm learning from you right now. Yeah. You're going.
You. So Eric Weinstein basically went into detail, and he's like, listen, and he spoke about how he thinks that he said that he believes that it's an operation that lived a little bit into the internet era and it couldn't survive because of the internet. Now, I don't know if that's true, but regardless, in his experience, he was talking about how Epstein was rich in the way that a movie billionaire is rich. See, like when you're thinking about a rich person on paper, right? Maybe they'll own an island, maybe they'll own a jet, like a really rich person, but not in the way of luxury that he did it, right? Not in the sense of like, private jet on the island, to the island, 27 times in a row, every famous person, like that doesn't happen in that way. It's a lot more casual than that. So, he explained that he was like rich in the way that like you would think that like Great Gatsby's rich, right? Like, mystery billionaire plane. Wow, this is so crazy. Not how billionaires actually are, which is a lot more casual, a lot more focused on their work. If you think about a guy like Mark Cuban, like, a guy who's just busy, talks about investing, so on and so forth. Epstein, he didn't really know where he made his money. And he never really talked about it. And he talked about, hedge fund trading. And there was never a single recorded trade of his company, by the way, which I think is interesting. And even when you look at the itemized assets, because I looked this up one time because I was bored. I'm like, what are the itemized assets of Jeffrey Epstein? And it was like, okay, all 6 or so of his properties, that makes sense. And then you get like $100 million that's just unaccounted for, which is like, oh, investments. And it's like, what? Like, what investments? Anyways, Eric Weinstein spoke about how when he went to the island, when he went into like one of the rooms or whatever, Epstein was there and he had the American flag on as the tablecloth and a cup of coffee that was like put on the edge so that so there was a hope to spill it. And there was a hole like about this big, like about like the size of like a lipstick or whatever in like one of the walls where you could like very slightly see a glare like from a camera.
Oh, wow.
And how there was a girl that he intentionally made wear, I guess, like a tank top or a bra or something like that, with, you know, what I would assume like, you know, big breasts, like, and he would like, Epstein put her on his knee and like would bounce his knee up and down. And it was like very intentional to try and get like to tempt Eric. Right. That's what he explained. And I knew another guy by the name of William Steele. He claims that he knew Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know. I wasn't there. He's a bit of a lesser known guy. He's in the true crime space, but he claims to have known Jeffrey Epstein. And he explained to me that, you know, and it's all in his book, by the way. His is all public, so I'm not like revealing a secret of his. Yeah. But he explained that, you know, if you walked, like he worked security, if you walked in the house, you knew there were cameras in that house. Like if you work security, like the whole place was like camera, every room, everyone. And everyone knows that. Everyone knows about the cameras. But how they would constantly bring up to him like, hey, you know, like there's this younger girl, don't worry, she's of age, like, you know, don't worry about it. Like they would constantly bring in younger girls, right? Yeah. And they would just tempt you. They would like persuade you. It would always be your decision. They would never force it upon you. They would just be like, don't worry, you know, she'll have sex with you. It's fine. Like very casual, which I think is kind of the scariest part of it, right?
What do you think? What do you think of the whole thing altogether, though? I want to hear your perspective because I can tell you've done your research on these little things. But in terms of two questions, why haven't the Epstein files come forward, and what do you believe Epstein was? You can go in either order.
So the first one, I think, is the most obvious. Why do you think? Right? It's the same answer that Tucker Carlson gave, which is when you know, I don't know why the Epstein files haven't been released. It's like the files of the most powerful people in the world doing horrible things. Like, you know, it's kind of a self-answering question. That's the easy to answer question. The second question was, what is Epstein, right? Who was he? That was your question? Okay.
Yep.
My stance, and this is a little bit of a hot take, but I think I know enough to at least make this conclusion, which is Jeffrey Epstein was not intelligence. What I think he was a lot more scary than intelligence. He was, because if you know anything about Epstein, he was one of the most supremely intelligent people you would ever meet. Right, according to Alan Dershowitz and like people that he knew, he could memorize anything, right? And he had what?
He was a math whiz.
Yeah, he was a math whiz, physics too, science again. But he could read books like if I remember like Dershowitz one time gave him a book like, you know, of his to like edit, and he like read the whole thing like in a day, you know. He was like a great reader, perfect attention span, and he was a master manipulator. But I think that what he was somebody who was an expert at anything he did, who found a market that nobody had tapped into in quite the same way, with a pathological obsession for control.
So you think his psychology, he did this all for like a power grab? Like it was his whole sole desire to have control over it. Interesting. What do you think of the ties, though, of Robert Maxwell to Israel?
Yeah. Okay. So I was going to say, I think that Epstein in general, if I was going to like nail it into one sentence, I think he's the most successful pimp or human trafficker of all time. Right. And he tapped into a market that nobody else has ever tapped into in quite the same way. And if I had to think of like, oh, you know, because everybody always has to bring up like, you know, the intelligence, like, you know, he had connections to intelligence. He had connections to MI6, right? Because at one point he committed a Ponzi scheme, I believe, with a guy, and he totally got away with it for some reason, which is another weird thing because this is very early on his career. And he had a lot of connections to intelligence. However, what doesn't make sense is, to me at least, you know, what I think is the most likely case was that he used those connections and he likely even sold those secrets to intelligence agencies, and he worked with them. And that's probably where the immunity came from, where, you know, Alexander Acosta's like, oh, you know, he's intelligence.
Yeah.
But I don't, and he definitely used it for favors. I wouldn't be shocked if that was for favors. Like, you know, you give a little something to the U.S. government, they give you like something in return, especially to an intelligence agency, you know, and it's happened before with, you know, MK Ultra. That's what I think is the most likely option, that he worked with people. And one of his most famous quotes in the documentary was, you know, a lot of people owe me favors. Now, I don't know who those people are. It could be anybody. But when you have a guy that had connections to both U.S. presidents in the 2016 election, I think he had a fair bit of people that he knew. And he was a master at people. He knew how to get people to like him.
Yeah.
Right? But I just don't. Another thing, too. just another thing with his psychology was he was a pathological narcissist, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like pathological obsession for control and a narcissist to the supreme. Like in phone calls, he's like, he's like 70 something. He's saying that felt like he got stuck in a time warp at 27,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he's ultra egotistical, as most rich people are, but he was like next level. I don't envision a guy like that feeling any capacity to work for anybody, right? You wouldn't give up that level of control, especially not for somebody like him. The guy literally would regulate the temperature in his room. He had an obsession with his health, right? He's like, hey, you ever like sleep at 67 degrees? Like it's perfect for your health. Like he knew everything about himself. A guy like that, number one, does not want to commit suicide. Number two, he wouldn't give up that level of control. Like he doesn't even want to give up a little bit of control to the temperature of his room, let alone, like if you get a guy who has that many cameras in his house, you don't give it up, and you don't, he wouldn't let himself get into a compromising position. That's my stance. And also too, he himself was definitely a pedophile, right? He definitely had those desires of himself.
Yeah, he had to. I
Yeah.
like the theory. Playing devil's advocate, one of the things that I think stands out to me about Epstein that is just a blatant red flag into his just behavior was just his ability to just see the situation. And he was like what Mark was describing about him, which was just like so disturbing, was like, he was so open about the pedophilia with him. Like he opened it up finally when he broke the news to him. He's like, I'm into it. And then he continued to do that. And so the intelligence angle comes out, especially after Acosta, they got the sweetheart deal. He told him it was above his pay grade and he got let go. And then the next thing you know, he's reigning terror for like the next 10 years before finally it goes down here at Jersey where he gets picked off by the feds. To me, I just think about the level of power he had and just the level of Mossad, of just what they do as intelligence. Because, when they go to the farm, the CIA and wherever Mossad goes, which I don't know where they go, but they're training, they have taken people with these egomaniacal, narcissistic personalities and they challenge them. They put them in the place being like, we can't do this without you. Kiriakou told the story, I think, or Bustamante being like, you use their ego and you use it on them, being able to tell them, being like, without you, we can't get any of this done. You are a savior. You are a hero. We need you. Without this, everything falls apart. And the tendency with narcissists is to be like, of course you do. Of course you need me. Yeah, I'm going to do it. So I think of those stories that I hear of how they turn those people into assets and utilize them. But you make a great point about just being someone who's so in control of every part of a situation. Why would he want some sort of intelligence to be monitoring his behavior, telling him what to do, expecting him to check in? Like he was a guy that probably didn't like authority. That like I can definitely see that being like he didn't want to be told what to do. He's gonna do whatever he wants, especially if he has a painting of Bill Clinton in a dress. He's telling the president "F you" to his face, being like, I can do whatever I want. So, your points are strong. I hear you.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, and another thing too is like you're saying about the paintings, there's another painting, and I think it's a creepier painting. Because sure, the one in the dress is weird, and you can get like the humiliation rituals, like that alleged stuff, like that John Cena is in a dress, why is he in a dress, like for no reason in public. Are those true? Probably. But I think what's weirder is there's a painting of George Bush, and you probably know what I'm talking about. George Bush has a paper plane, and there's a Jenga tower that's collapsed, and he's throwing paper airplanes at the Jenga tower.
Mm-hmm.
That's weird. That is far creepier, I think, to me, than the dress.
Yeah, dude. It's just all the ties to it. That's what makes this such a bombshell of a story, because when you're talking about sitting presidents like the Clintons, the Bushes, these people that literally ran the US are connected to an individual that helped orchestrate, lack of a better word, the greatest sex trafficking ring of power control. Your mind goes in all these directions. And this is where I also get worried, because I think of the people, I like Ian Carroll. I think he also goes a little too far in some things, but you start to go into the conspiratorial route, and this is where conspiracies just get way out of hand. And like, you got to use Occam's razor and just realize, some of it's in a simple way. Like what you said there, I really appreciate, because it is a simple breakdown of his psychology and being like, You know, I can see him doing this, but then I can also see intelligence being like, hey, you help us, we scratch your back, I scratch your back, we're all happy. I can totally see that. But some people want to take it to the next level, being like, you know, and not saying that this doesn't happen. I do believe this happens, where like they're a satanic cult, like Bohemian Grove, they're coming together, they're worshiping, they're sacrificing babies. Like, is it as extreme as that? I don't know. You know, it makes for a great Hollywood movie. You know, it makes for a very fascinating plot, and people on Reddit will go crazy over it. But sometimes the simplest explanation and the boring one is the right one. So I always try to keep my reservations, being like, all right, let me not go too far. Let me find the most primary sources. And that's kind of going full circle why I did the video on Mark Epstein, because he's the most primary source we have other than Ghislaine, who I'm amazed that she's still alive at this point. And hearing his side, like the 2016 election, he tells that story of how he was sitting with Jeffrey. They're on the couch watching Clinton and Trump debate. And Jeffrey looks over at him and smiles and starts laughing. And Mark's like, what's so funny? And he's like, if you knew what I knew about these two people, they would have to cancel the election. So when you hear things like this, your mind just goes like, who the hell is this guy? Like, what is he doing? And, you know, I can see why then people start to go down the conspiratorial route, being like, is he just bluffing? Is he making a joke? His brother knows he hangs out with these movers and shakers. Is he just, you know, what's he trying to do there? But, you know, all we have are just these stories and these one-liners. You know, we don't have the primary source anymore. So it's a very, very convoluted situation.
Well, I would also like to add one more thing. You know, in terms of like the intelligence stuff, is we know nothing really about him. And there's no real other unifying theory other than that, other than that he was intelligence. My question is, why would we believe the only thing? Why is it that there's one theory that everybody just generally agrees upon? Like, oh, that makes sense. All right, we all agree. News organizations have said it. You know, Candace Owens has said it. You know, there's rumors about it. But why is that the one thing that everybody can agree on? There's nothing that anybody else can agree on with this guy. You know, who killed him? Maybe it was the Clintons. Maybe it was his family. Maybe it was that guy. You know, maybe it was his like.
Yeah.
We all agree that he's intelligent. That's weird. I don't like that. That's not normal, right?
Yeah. I will say though, one of the things though, which, you know, is kind of fair in this regard, is that you look at the JFK files, and we've had people been saying that it was the CIA working with the mafia, Marcello Trafficante, and what was the other guy? Samuel Trafficante and Marcello. So those are the three. And, you know, all the evidence is pointing towards Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't a lone gunman. You know, everyone kept saying he was the lone gunman, that there was a magic bullet and it went through Conley. And then, you know, before you know it, it ends up in his leg and it somehow went through his shoulder, and bullets are weird, which is the biggest pile of crap I've ever heard. And the files have come forward. And so much of it, you know, we can get into the Israel part if you want to about those things, but so much of what has come forward kind of has proven the people of Oliver Stone to Luis Ferrante, who we had on the podcast, where these people have spent years studying, going through files, looking at different perspectives from Louisiana, New York, to these agents, to these other stories, and, you know, cross-checking all that. And what we've learned is, you know, pretty much what all the conspiracy theorists were saying, a lot of it has been right. So despite what you're saying there, I know what you're saying, how like, you know, the unified agreement is a bit strange, where it's like we all agree that he's intelligence, but is that some sort of trickery? Is that some sort of taking your eye off the ball where there's something else bigger? You know, and that's something that the CIA people always say that we had in this guy, Michael Hedger, knock. Fascinating story. One of the things he was taught, which is a rule that I know all CIA is taught, especially these assets, is when you're in a situation, you have a problem, you try to bring another bigger problem to the situation.
Right.
Get people off the main problem. And I've never forgotten that line, because I'm like, it's such a brilliant way. You know, it could be in a high intense situation where you're sitting across cartel and they're telling you, you have to kill this person. And it's like, how do I get out of this? Let me make a bigger problem for them. Now we're off of it. Right. Now apply that from that micro scale, take it to a macro. What does that look like? What you're saying.
Agreed. Yeah, no. I mean, but then here's another thing. So this reminds me, and we could pivot to another case too. Diddy. So Diddy Diddy, what's crazy about there's many things about his case that are interesting, and there's a lot of similarities, getting a bunch of rich and powerful people with a bunch of underage girls, it's the classic Epstein story, right? And so there was an interview recently. There's this guy, Mark Layetta, Softwood Underbelly. Do you know who? Yeah. So he did an interview. You should get him on Julian's show, by the way, Mark Layetta. That'd be a cool one.
Are you talking about the lady, the girl, the dancer that went to the party?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I know exactly that one. I watched. It's so funny. That's the most recent one I've watched of his because I was like, I have to know that. But keep going, please.
Yeah. So, well, in the video, she does talk about the fact that there was minors there, and all the phones were put away. Now, could this just be a prostitute making up a lie? Sure. But I think what's so crazy is the fact that there's these massive sex parties that everybody knows about, like these freak offs and all this stuff, and all these massive sex parties with some of the richest, most famous people in the world, and then it just kind of dies out as to what's going on at the parties. That was the first thing that came out, was that these parties were insane, and he's getting raided by Homeland Security and the FBI, and all of a sudden the parties go away. There's no real talk about what happened at the parties or who was there, right? Everybody's always asking about the Epstein flight logs. Nobody's asking about the Diddy party list, right? And I think that's a little bit more important, or not more important, but as important, because it's the same thing. And especially when you have such obvious evidence, right? There's parallels, right? So Epstein had another thing. He had a pathological obsession with sex as well. So his house was like covered in dildos, right? And it's really vulgar, but it's like his house was like riddled with sex toys.
Yeah, vagina pictures, all that. Yeah.
There was picture paintings of naked young girl, like weird stuff.
Strange.
But Diddy has the infamous thousands of bottles of baby oil, 1,000 gallons, I think, and when you're throwing parties like that are infamous for having prostitutes and sex and very rich and powerful people, and there's probably minors there, and I would assume he has cameras at his house, but there's no phones there or anything. Like, I don't know. I think it's interesting. And another thing too, his bodyguard came out, and multiple people have interviewed this guy, and they all say that. And he said, he's like, yeah, Diddy was an FBI informant, and that's how he got away with it for 26 years. I also think it's interesting, and I've always pointed this out, that TMZ, for as many sources as they have and as many famous people as they know and connections, that's another weird guy. And that's another story I want to talk about. But for as many famous people as they know and connections that they have and ins and inside sources and people that are paid inside sources, the Diddy parties are like news. Like they're a new thing, right? And they've existed for years. LeBron just talked about it. Everybody talked about it.
It's nothing like a Diddy party.
Yeah, exactly. So why now? Why do we only know about this now? Why is it that there's a tape of him beating the crap out of his ex-girlfriend that comes out years after the tape had already existed? And supposedly, I think it was leaked. But my question is, why now? And again, you got to remember, he's doing this with a bunch of different friends of his. Why aren't they getting interrogated? Where's the deposition of, I don't know, Ellen, or I'm just naming a random person, or Leonardo DiCaprio? Where is their deposition? Why aren't they getting sued? Why aren't they also being investigated? Why aren't they co-conspirators? Like it doesn't add up. There has to be somebody else. It's not just one person. That's what it seems, but it's not. So there's a lot of things that don't make sense there as well.
Yeah, George, you make some great points. I think one of the things to also take note of is you look at this situation with Diddy and Epstein, and why was it such on a tight lid that it never got out, that no one knew what was going on, or if they did, the people that were in the end, they kept it secret. And I think the greatest example of this most recently was the Me Too movement, right, where you really saw how someone like Harvey Weinstein, and I know Candace Owens is doing a whole series, and I haven't gone into it, so I'm just going based on what I publicly know about it. I know there's a whole side of it that I'm not going to get into, but based on what we know, this guy, again, mover and shaker, producer in Hollywood, has all the money, in control, can blackball you, can essentially make your career, ruin your career. In exchange, he wants sex. And for God knows, over 2 decades, he was doing this. Some of the most powerful people, Gwyneth Paltrow, some of these other celebrities, and a lot of celebrities, some that have come forward who are like nobodies, but in the 90s were about to take off and they're gone. And you see the level of how money and power can truly manipulate people and change people. And, that's why when you have whistleblowers, you truly whistleblowers are people that I consider national heroes in many respects, like Edward Snowden, where they have almost nothing to gain and everything to lose. And it's that conversation you have with yourself at night where you have to decide, knowing that I'm going to break this. This is going to help the greater population, but I'm going to lose everything. And, you know, in the Me Too movement, I'm thinking about these women where it's like, if they come forward, you know, they have to worry about paying for the lawyers. Can they afford the lawyers? Can they take the hit? Can Harvey Weinstein get the media to flip on this person and ruin their life? And before you know it, they're nobody, poor, living on the streets. Like, I can only imagine taking that situation and applying it to some of Diddy's people or Epstein's people. Again, I'm not condoning that, but I can understand kind of the thought process that gets them stuck in these places where then, you know, it comes to a point where there's so many people, it's overwhelming, where it's like, we're just going to come forward and just like a bull, just ride through it. But it's a hard place to be. And, you know, that's why I go back to, I really hope and pray that there's some justice for these victims, because there were so many of them, and there's only like a few that are publicly known, but there's so many of these women that were freaking lives ruined, you know, their innocence taken away from them at a young age, where now it's like they're the only thing they got was Epstein, quote unquote, hung himself, and no one's buying that. And Ghislaine Maxwell's off scot-free, and there's been no punishment. There's been nothing to help them, you know, get over this. So it's a mess, man. It's a mess.
Well, you know, I do want to talk about the corruption when you're talking about money and power. So there's, you guys did an interview with Aaron Smith-Levin, or Julian did, I should say. And, you know, he did an interview with Lex Friedman, and he talked about Scientology and how Scientology has gotten away with what they've done for so many years, right? Especially when it's so public and so obvious, right?
Great example. Yes.
So in that he gives and I have my own theories about this too, by the way, but the main things he talks about is that there's two types of corruption. And I'm kind of, you know, paraphrasing, putting words in his mouth a little bit, but like the general idea of what he's saying is there's soft corruption. That's what Scientology does. And by proxy, I'm coming up with the idea of hard corruption. Hard corruption is you're paying off a cop to not investigate you or a prosecutor directly, which is illegal.
Yeah.
What's not illegal is soft corruption. Soft corruption is you hire lobbyists and you hire off-duty cops.
Like the Sackler family with Purdue Pharma. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not too familiar with like that whole case. But I think I'd imagine it's kind of similar. I know who they are. They invented Oxycontin. But yeah, no. So the whole, so Scientology, yeah. So they do something called soft corruption. Soft corruption is where, you know, you hire lobbyists to talk to the mayor of Clearwater, Florida, which is where most of their headquarters are, or of Los Angeles. You know, you hire off-duty cops to, you know, talk to you about maybe some witnesses or some reports that might come in about maybe sex abuse. Things like that, which are bordering illegal, right? Where you're using money and lawyers to figure out things that you really shouldn't be able to, but you're not technically breaking the law, right? And what's funny, according to Aaron Smith-Levin, is that most of these people fucking hate Scientology. Like they hate it so much, but they do it because they're getting paid a lot of money. Most of the security, off-duty cops, most of the, you know, and they've done that for years, right? And it's worked. And also the lawsuits, of course, they don't do that as much now because judges, I don't think, would favor them. But you know, it's definitely a power move. It's very hard to prosecute somebody when that person knows the police that would investigate them, right? And you know, most people don't know about this, but Operation Snow White, which was by Scientology. Do you know about this?
No, I have no idea. So
the biggest FBI raid in history was Scientology International Headquarters, back when L. Ron Hubbard was still the leader.
Okay.
And it was called what L. Ron Hubbard did was he put out an order, because this is where he started to become like dictatorial, like very paranoid. Put out an order called Operation Snow White. And there was other operations too in other countries, but it was that he gave this order to Scientology members to go into federal buildings to get hired in some cases, including the CIA, the FBI, the IRS, like the main three, and to basically, you know, obstruct evidence, like to get rid of files, to destroy things, like, and ultimately it did lead to everybody, like hundreds of people getting arrested. The only person that wasn't arrested was L. Ron Hubbard. His wife got arrested though. L. Ron Hubbard at the time was like in the middle of nowhere in California. This is where he died. But that's more hard corruption, but you know, both get used all the time. However, you know, so my stance is that it's a mix of both, right? I think there's a lot of that going on, and I think Scientology is like the best example of that because they're an organization that's been blatantly publicly doing horrible things for the past 10 years. The FBI is totally aware. Actually, Tony Ortega, who you guys have also interviewed, on his blog, he spoke about how there were planned raids on Scientology. There were planned raids that fell through for no particular reason. Why? I don't know, but there's definitely something going on there. You know, then we can also get into the fact that Scientology started when MK Ultra ended. Which
really?
Yeah, so 1953. If you look up 1953, MK Ultra, that's when MK Ultra ended.
Yeah.
And you know, Scientology began.
Or 1953, because wasn't MK Ultra used in the 60s though? Wasn't it with the hippies and drugs in San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury? So it probably started, right?
So it was around that same time. I remember. Let me look it up. So Scientology began around 1954. When did MK Ultra end? Or let me look at where it began. Okay, it began in 1953. So did Scientology. Around that same time. So they began at the exact same time. I think that's very interesting that one of the most infamous mind control cults in history was started around the same time as the CIA mind control.
Look at the topics we're hitting on. And, you know, this can kind of shift us into kind of just like, you know, I know you're a Christian, just the biblical implications this has, where the things that people are using on humans are the manipulation of money, women, and power. It comes simply to those three things. You look at all these and you just see how, you know, with Epstein, Diddy, those situations, how just people will morally put themselves in a place where it's just, it's so dangerous, but it's so, I don't even know what the word is, but they expose themselves in a place of sin. I guess that's the only word that comes to mind, where it's so easy. You know, you're like, all right, I'm going to a party. There's going to be a lot of girls there. There's a lot of high flying people, you know, power, money. It just shows you how humans are so corruptible by just those three things, you know. And, you know, I'm not immune to this. You're not immune to this, but you just see this over and over again. And this is just the last 30 years. You think about hundreds of years ago, you look at the story of David in the Bible, you look at the story of Solomon the Wise, you know, you see all these people and it's like, it's repeating history over and over. And Mark Twain has that lovely quote I like, which is, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. And that you just see it in a different essence, in a different face, and how it's just constantly used. So it's like, you know, these tactics, the internet, obviously a lot of the things that we have today are new. You know, we have Tesla, these electric cars, we have these unmanned vehicles that are flying now, which is amazing. And we're going in this direction of this futuristic AI direction, but the human tendencies has never changed. And those are things that civilizations and powerful people have been using on other people for so many years. And it's like, we're just, for whatever reason, we're too dumb to not just realize that and recognize it and try to improve on that. It's just going to always happen. And I just find that so fascinating, because it's like, none of these things are new. Obviously, the things that the CIA does, the tactics, the operations, they're cool, they're flashy, they're fascinating, but it's all playing on those three things of psychology, that it's just like, duh, like that's how you get people to do what you want them to do. Sorry for that tangent, but I just thought I should share that.
Well, I always like to say that people, so names and faces will always change, but people never do. Or the biblical way of saying it is, you know, there's nothing new under the sun, which is,
yeah,
there, you know, time will live. I'm sorry, not time will live. Humans will never really change. There's nothing new that's going to happen. You know, there's nothing that history has not happened in history already, in the sense of there's not a new form of, you know, of human nature, right? There's not, you know, oh, some guy assassinated a rich and powerful man in New York City, you know. It's like, okay, well, that's probably happened a million times. Like, people like rich and powerful do get assassinated a lot.
It's just how the story is told. It's just the twists. How do they add the colors to it? How do they add the flair? That's where it seems different, and that's where you make it something where it's crazier than what it is, and that's what media is. That's what we do right here. That's mainstream media, is getting stories that happen all the time or frequently, but it's telling it a different way. It's kind of like that saying of like, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Right.
That's it. That's essentially what I get from when I look back at the history of how things are happening. And I see these situations. It's like none of this is new. It's being said in a way. It's just a little bit different in that way.
Well, there's definitely a lot of people too that have gotten creative over the past years, and there are definitely new things that have come out in modern history. For example, intelligence agencies and spies weren't quite the same hundreds of years ago as they are now. They still existed, but they're not quite the same, for sure. And it wasn't to the level of advancedity, I guess, or advancedness. Another thing too is criminal prosecution of world leaders that usually wouldn't happen hundreds of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely been a lot of changes, but overall, you are right. Yeah, human nature is not going to change. Generally speaking, there are flares, though. You are right in saying that there's flares, though. I like that word. There's flares, different things that have happened. And this is like a side thing, but like one thing that's new. And this is a person I was thinking when we're talking about soft corruption.
Mm-hmm.
So porn. So Pornhub CEO, or not CEO, not the CEO, the former owner of Pornhub, Bernd Bergmair.
Yeah.
He was regarded. He's now things are coming to light about him by this lady by the name of Lila Mickelwaite.
Yeah.
Not Theo Vaughn, but his name is Bernd Bergmair. He was an estimated worth of over $2 billion, and for years nobody knew who he was. And he owned the company MindGeek that owned Pornhub. Now here's the problem: for years, Pornhub had an issue of underage girls. Right, a lot of a lot of porn sites have this issue of underage minors, right? And verification, because how do you let's say there's two people in a scene, right, and it's an amateur, let's just say some guy filming sex with somebody he knows. Do they both have to verify, right? Like how, and what if he doesn't know? Like there's the basic questions, and then there's like also the more horrific side of human nature where it's like, what if he does know but he's verified? And like these things go on, and you can say, what if it's in a different country? But anyways, in particular, they got a lot of lawsuits, or they got a decent amount, right, with victims and such. And for years, nobody could track down this guy. The company did. There was a company that did it. I think his name was Tortoise Media, and they tracked him down to his house. And there's only one picture of him on the internet. He's never done an interview either. The only person that's ever answered regards to him was his wife, who was a model, of course. But
of course,
his wife, and he lived in like the richest part of London too.
Yeah.
His wife gave an interview and was like, "Oh, he wants to leave the company," and she like begged him for years to leave the company. She knew about it.
Yeah.
But what's so weird is that to me, like when it's like being the head of all the cigarette companies, right? Because by the way, MindGeek doesn't own just Pornhub; it owns RedTube, it owns like all the other porn sites,
all those, yeah,
everything. It owns all the big ones at least. And there's another guy, I think, like the owner of X Videos, right? And like it's like a funny tangent way with it, right? There was one company called X Videos.
Yeah.
I think it was X Hamster maybe. And anyways, one of the websites, the owner, I think, eventually he did, like his name did come out, but somebody contacted him and was like, "Hey, would you buy the site? Can I buy the site for like $200 million? And he's like, "No, sorry, I'm playing Diablo 2 or something like that." Right. And
What?
It was some like stupid joke like that. But my question is, if you have that much money and pride to where you can just turn down $200 million like that, how much money are these people making? Right. Probably a lot. But they're also getting away with insane things. There's no moderation either. There's been like deep dives into the moderation of these sites. It's fucking horrible. And there's actually been recordings of senior executives at these companies, right? Like without them knowing on dates. And they'll be like, "Yeah, I couldn't defend this in court. Yeah, there's definitely minors on the site, but what are we going to do about it?" Like very, very casual about it.
What do you think of the whole Pornhub ban?
Well, that's just a tariff issue. That's an economic issue. I don't think much of it. Like, what do you mean?
Just banning porn, getting rid of it.
I'm
Like
not for it.
countries like, well, let's get rid of porn tomorrow. No more porn anymore.
No, I'm not for it because that's a slippery slope. Once you get rid of that, like I don't think it's a good thing. I think porn is horrible for people, and I think it's going to be the next cigarettes in terms of the way that it affects people, like mentally. I don't think we know the effects yet, and I think it's going to be a travesty, especially for like men and dating and loneliness.
Yeah.
But I don't think that banning it is the solution because it's like, okay, well, let's it's like banning alcohol. It's like that's a slippery slope. Like once you start banning one thing, then like you have to ban the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, right? It doesn't really solve what you think it would. And then, like for me, the slippery slope would be, first you ban porn, then you just ban anything that's remotely sexual. Then let's just ban all women from being in films. Like I'm just naming an example.
Right.
Or now let's make it so that women can't dress a certain way in public. Like that's how I would kind of envision that slope going.
I see. Yeah, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place with that one because part of me is there are no benefits to porn for nobody. Nobody wins except the execs because the trauma that the porn stars are going through, the amount of trauma, most of them kill themselves before 30. The data is so strong in that, the psychology on that. And then on top of that, the people that are watching it doesn't help them, like you said, loneliness, porn addiction, lack of ejaculation, relationships, they lose this content. Like one of the things that is so prevalent in both our generations, which has been sad to see, is it causes a lot of men to not want to socialize anymore. And it's a coping mechanism. And that socialization is so key to humans just being able to connect, our ability to connect and seeing that. So to me, like, I just don't see any benefits to it. But as you said, the slippery slope where, if I put on my biblical hat right now, I'm like, get rid of it. I don't want it. But if I put on my American hat, we'll put it like Constitution hat, I agree where it's like, it's one of those things where I don't want to infringe on people's rights. If someone wants to do something like that and they want to make money from it, like you said, there's a slippery slope there. They should have every right to do it. I think it's morally wrong, and I think it's horrible, and I think it's messing people up. But part of me is like, I shouldn't stop them because then I'm infringing on their right to do what they want to do. But then again, like you said, it ties into trafficking and a lot of underage and minors where, that's where I think I lean strongly on the banning of it because there's so many implications with the trafficking, with the minors and the trauma and the damage where, OnlyFans is a great example of what we were just talking about earlier, where it's like, it's the same thing. It's just wrapped up differently. People are okay with OnlyFans because it's like, let's give the creator power. Let's empower them. They can make money. They're the ones that are in control of what they put out there. But it's like, they're still going to deal with the trauma. Yeah. It's like, we might not be making whatever those creators make $100 million or whatever crazy amount per month. And they get to be in their Lamborghinis and their penthouse in New York and the whole nine. But again, from a moral standpoint, it's things that are so corrupted. It's the Jezebel spirit that's like in the world that I think is just so damaging where, I think I tend to lean more on the banning of it. But then the only hesitation is that slippery slope of getting to the point where it's like you said, now it's like women can't wear these things. And the next thing you know, we're in freaking Iraq and they can't wear any clothes and they're in hijabs. So it's a hard place. And I hate to be the people that are making these decisions. So I can only take it from a familial standpoint where I'm like, with my kids, it's like, there's no way, if like banning immediately, get no technology, what I mean? Like, that's the only place I can control it. But I hate to push it onto other people. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, the train starts with you. So honestly, you're on the right track. But, another thing too, Leonid Radvinsky is the owner of OnlyFans, right? Do you want to guess how much he made? I think it was like a year or two ago.
I'm guessing more than a couple bucks.
More than $1 for sure. It's $650 million a year, which is
totally empowering the creators. It's total empowerment. The women are getting what they deserve, George. You can't stop him. Come on. He's one for the women.
Yeah, he makes $2 million a day, which is beyond me. He has a house with a tennis court, everything. But what's interesting about him is that he has had a history of starting webcam sites and other websites, which is basically the exact same thing. So it makes me then question, does this guy? I mean, well, I know this guy doesn't care. I shouldn't even ask that question. But it begs a very sad reality, a question of a very sad reality, which is what is happening to men, which then the answer is men are becoming increasingly lonelier and everybody's becoming more unhappy. Because if half the population like is becoming lonelier and happier, and the other half will also become lonelier and unhappier. That's my stance.
And a simple thing, procreation. We're going to have less procreation. The intelligence of men is going to go down just because if you're stuck to a screen and you have no self-discipline or control to get off it and go work on yourself and go work out and go outside and maybe red pill it and do something like that, then you're not going to have strong men in society. So to me, it's like you got to think 10, 20 years down the road where it's like these kids that are being affected by this right now are going to be the politicians, that are going to be the senators, that are going to be making the bills, that are going to be passing the laws, that are going to be running the country. You're telling me they're going to be competent enough with all the crap that they went through when they're young to be able to do that and function and run the country? No, it sounds like the book of Revelations. It sounds like it's the end times. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, listen, I'll put it also this way too, to like not sound as end of the worldy. One thing I will say is that porn has existed as long as mankind has existed. I mean, people have found dirty drawings in caves, it's not a new thing. It's just the problem is the accessibility. The problem has been in modern times, it's the accessibility. It's the fact that, at least when our grandfathers or your dad, well, my dad too, I guess, but magazines, like there's been dirty magazines. Hugh Hefner was like a multi-billionaire or multi-millionaire at the very least for basically just getting women to dress a certain way and take pictures of it. Like, it's not a novel idea. The difference is that you couldn't see thousands of videos of every fantasy you want played out, right? Or virtually every fantasy. And now on top of this, you also have the ability to pay somebody to act out that fantasy, right? Potentially even with somebody, like with OnlyFans. Like, it started out as just, okay, here's a picture. Actually originally started out as just, okay, we're going to draw something. We're going to try and recreate this. Then it turned into, all right, here's a picture of somebody naked or maybe even somebody having sex. I don't know. And then then it shifted into, all right, internet, obviously I want to, let's see a video of it. Right. Then you see a video of it. Then, the videos get clearer, but then it becomes more, and then there's more and more of it. Okay. Then it becomes more tailored to very specific people. Now it's very casual where, there are people that I've known that have started those careers. Right. Yeah. I mean, there was, actually, I can't even tell this story. I was going to,
keep your sources tight. Come on. Don't be leaking that information at Dirty Laundry now.
Yeah, no. So I was just going to say that it's everywhere. It's literally everywhere. The fact that I can walk, right? Not that far away from where I am. And there's people, I mean, I shouldn't even just say women, just people in general that are basically secretly porn stars. It's a weird reality to live in.
But George, this is the worrisome. All that I agree has been happening, but the worst part is society is accepting it. You go on the internet and it has become culturally normal to start an OnlyFans and be naked and make money. It is culturally normal to watch porn. It's culturally normal to be half naked on the internet, showing your tits and your ass, and then showing your dick. You know what I mean? The fact that that's becoming normal, that trend is not right. And I understand during Rome, they had all the orgies and they were going crazy, but the accessibility, like you mentioned, but now the fact that people are making it normal where they're live streaming and they're hanging out with these people and it's normal to go hook it up with a hooker and a porn star and all that. That is where I see such detrimental effects. And I hate to be the doom and gloomer right here, but that we have to change that. And I don't see where that's changing because it's I can go on Instagram right now and there'll probably be feeds in there that Instagram feeds you, like TikTok will do because they want us to see it in China, but you'll just see naked people and you're just I don't want to see this. But after enough time, what is that psychology? What is happening to your brain? You're normalizing it, is desensitized. And before you know it, it kills all the senses. But like you said, it's making all these men emasculated in many ways. So that, I hate to end on that note in that area. I am optimistic, I believe in Jesus. So I feel good that, the future is headed in the right direction in that regard. I know where that's going. But in terms of that situation, I have yet to see any direction where it's like we're moving in a better way. You know, I think a lot of the talking heads today, you know, including Julian, Joe Rogan, Chris Williamson, all these people, I think we have great leaders in that respect where people can look towards and be like, that's how you want to model. And I'm speaking mostly for men and women. There's definitely other people there, you know, athletes and other women that are inspiring as well. But for men, tailoring that conversation to that, you know, there are men out there that we can look towards in that direction. It's becoming harder and harder when it's saturated with just tits and boobs. You know what I mean? Like, it's just hard.
Well, there's one thing, you know, which is we can't be hypocrites, and we gotta say this. Listen, men are also at fault. Actually, I would argue that men are more at fault than women, or any other group of people, because it wouldn't work if men didn't exist, right? I think it was like Ty Lopez, which regardless of what people think of him, Ty Lopez had he did an interview and he's like, listen, money would be nothing in a world without women. Money would be nothing. Like, there would be no point. Like, if you really think about it, if men did not have women, men would sit in, okay, I mean, like, you know, I don't know about me, but like, you know, he was saying that, like, a lot of men would just sit inside all day and do nothing. Like, they would just sit inside, like, eating Cheetos and like playing Xbox. Like, and I'm like, he's kind of onto something here. Like, if there was no point, like, let's say we had asexual reproduction, you know, and you were to like see both sides of that. With women, I don't know what would happen because I'm not a woman. But with men, what I can say almost for certain is like a lot of men would just sit inside all day and just like play Xbox and eat Cheetos and like go to work and that's it. Like, there would be a very unfulfilling life for me, because I do want to get married and have kids.
Yeah, women are the spark of life, dude. Like, they literally physically and mentally and emotionally are the spark of life. Without women, you know, we would be useless. We'd be just a bunch of freaking idiots, just like you said, playing video games or doing stupid stuff. You know, they reel us in, and, you know, they're that sense, that feminine presence that's incredibly necessary for life, like you said. So, you know, you're 100% right. Men are just as much responsible for promoting this. And, you know, that, I think that's another tangent, but, you know, that's one of the things that bothers me with Andrew Tate in his past, where it was a lot of that promotion where he was taking advantage of that. And, you know, I think a lot of men do that, is they see these women, they see these situations, and they take advantage of that. And, you know, like you said, we're just as responsible, you know, both sides equal to blame here. It's just the culture I encourage to go in a direction that's more beneficial and what's going to be something that will help you grow as an individual to where you want to be an actual productive member of society. Period.
I think that's a good place to end off. All right. Any final words for the audience?
No, George, thank you so much for having me on, man. I really appreciate it. It's great talking to you. You have so much knowledge, and like I told you off air, it's really inspiring to see what you're doing and continue to do it, because your consistency is one to none. Just keep doing it. So thank you again.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. We'll talk after the show in 3, 2,